When I had to tell that to that personal representative, my heart dropped because I was like, oh my God, this person just totally lost all of that money.
True sales is not something that needs to be forced. If you have a solution to someone's problem and you want to help them and it's a win-win, the sale itself.
I can tell you as a real estate expert and someone who has invested in real estate, that is hogwash. That is nonsense. That is rubbish.
Oftentimes, being a few payments behind is repairable, but the situation where there's no money to pay the mortgage, but somebody wants to keep the house, that's tricky.
I'm kind of very passionate, Drea, about helping people understand what these things are.
I'm often the first person to say, take some time, be with your family, and reach back out to me in a month or two, and let's talk again.
I will blame my industry, Drea. Real estate industry has a lot of problems. Welcome to the Texas Probate Real Estate Podcast. My name is Jeremy Kritt, the owner and broker of Kritt Real Estate and the founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. On this program, we bring to you really qualified people who are in the probate space. I want them to share with you their knowledge and their experience so that it can help you during this very challenging time. Today, I have Drea, who is a probate and trust attorney here in the greater Austin area. Drea, I want to welcome you to our program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. It's our two fields. There's a lot of overlap. So it's nice to be able to identify the points we can both excel at advising clients.
Absolutely. Actually, Drea and I got to know each other a little bit. We had a mutual client. And so I know firsthand how great of an attorney Drea is. Drea, I just want to say that I really appreciated your input and your expertise as we were going through a very challenging situation in a very recent deal I did.
Well, thank you so much. I know what you're talking about, and I think we're all happy with where we wound up at the end. It was a couple of hurdles to get over, but we did it.
Absolutely. So, Drea, I want to go ahead and start this time with you to just really actually learn more about you. And could you just share with us a little bit about just where you're coming from? Anything you want to share? Are you from Texas? Where'd you grow up? How'd you get into law? How did you get into probate law? Let us know. Tell us about it.
Well, I kind of bounced around a bit. I'm actually originally from Canada. My parents are polar opposites. So my mom's American, my dad's Canadian, and I kind of moved back and forth as a kid. So I've lived in both countries and then decided to go to college in the States. So I went to University of Miami, which put me in South Florida for about 5 years. And at that point, I kind of wanted to find a place to call my own. So found Austin, visited a few places and decided Austin was it and relocated here. And that was around a couple of decades ago. So moved here, found a job, loved the Keep Austin Weird lifestyle and decided that I wanted to go to law school. So I did that while working and sort of just kept on at it. And I practiced in a couple different areas of law, but I wound up focusing quite a bit on trust administration specifically. So I was able to take the experience from that and translate it into what is now my specialty, which is estate planning and probate, and of course, trust creation and administration.
Just out of curiosity, I mean, what kind of got into your mind to become a lawyer? And what were you doing before?
That's a great question. I was in sales, which is, an entrepreneurial skill set that you're going to learn early on. So I did sales. Wasn't a particular field that I loved. And, I've always loved academia. Books, learning at the time, I was like, I just kind of wanted to go back to college because I loved it. It made sense. I love education. I love the theoretical knowledge, but that's not actually the real world. The real world is dealing with people. And if you can solve problems for people and figure out a win-win situation, it's far more satisfying than staying in books all the time. Although I spend plenty of time in books.
Absolutely. Now, in the legal world, there's more like transactional attorneys, and then there's litigators. Where do you put yourself on that kind of? I know it's often both, but where do you put yourself on that continuum?
More transactional. I would say it is both. The interesting part of estate planning and probate is you are focusing on the transactional side of things with estate planning. You are preparing for situations that might occur in the future and preventing problems before they happen. On the flip side of things, more litigation, problems have happened, you got to sort it out. It's not always litigation. A lot of estate settlement and probate is not a combative situation. It's collaborative problem solving, but you still have problems to solve. Yeah. So on the other side of things is things have happened, you can't unring certain bells, and you got to figure out what you're doing with this particular landscape for this particular family.
I like that. Let's now get into probate specifically. Now, Here at Texas Probate Real Estate, I, as the broker here, I'm dealing with a lot of different situations. And it's always interesting talking to the attorneys because the attorneys are basically teeing everything up. And that's where I kind of take over, right? So they've gone through all the probate stuff. And now we've got the real estate asset, which is really typically the largest thing in the estate. At least that's been my experience. I mean, it's not always the case, but normally the real estate is really the crown jewel of the estate. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah. Classically, a person's home or a certain piece of real estate are their largest assets and their long-term investments. That's what they have. And oftentimes in probate, you have to go through the hoops to get in front of the judge, get someone appointed before you can actually sign the sales contract and sell the real estate in order to do all the other things that need to be done. So it's a very big hurdle in the overall process.
Yeah. It's interesting that you just said something I thought was very interesting. And I've talked about it before on the podcast here, is that one of the we talked about sales earlier. You were in sales. So I liked you from the moment that I first spoke with you. But when you said you were in sales, I knew you were. Now I know you're my people. So you really will understand at a deep level what I'm about to say. When you're in sales, there is a instinctual urge to try to close a deal, to close an opportunity into a signed contract of some kind, and that will result in some sale, right? It's very interesting, Drea, because in the world of real estate, and I don't know if you know this, but I would say 70, the NAR statistic is around 75% of agents did not do an actual real estate transaction within the last 12 months. Also, the failure rate is around, 90, 95% in terms of people who don't renew their license after the first 2 years. So the average it is very substantial. And so because that's true, the reality is that a lot of the real estate agents that are out here that are licensed really have a very low level of experience, not just in terms of longevity in the business, but also transactional volume. And one of the things that I've learned as a real estate agent, actually, this August, I will have been in real estate for 9 years. August 15th will be 9 years in the real estate business full time. And one of the things that I'm sure you would agree, and I think that this is probably true with attorneys as well, right? If you were an attorney for 9 years and you only worked 2 cases, you probably don't have the breadth of experience that has allowed you to see all the little permutations and problems and wrinkles that can occur, right? Because it's such a big problem. Like it's the law for probate. It's very big, and there's a lot of different cases and situations, and fact. A lot of these things are fact dependent. So there's a lot of little things that if you haven't seen them before, maybe you have to talk to a colleague that has seen it before, that's been in there longer, right? You consult with people. So anyway, going back to real estate and the selling of real estate. Not a lot, but some real estate agents who maybe are approaching people that are in probate deliberately, or they just happen to stumble upon it. They don't know a lot of the ins and outs about probate. So you just said something about, right, you have a house, and even though they may have filed for probate, they may not have the authority to sign contracts on behalf of the estate, for example, to sell the house, right? And that's a very big mistake that a lot of real estate agents make. They might just sign people up and they don't realize what's going on. They go under contract with a buyer, and then they realize when they get to the title company, which is like kind of the master gatekeeper of the whole thing, they realize they can't do anything. And that could cause a lot of problems for the estate and also the buyer who might be transacting with them. I'm just curious, have you come across issues like that in your experience?
I have. Sometimes people will set up consultations. They'll reach out and they'll say, "Hey, I've got a sale pending. We're closing next week, and the title company said I need letters testamentary. Can I get those in a few days?" That I can explain what that situation is for people who may not be familiar, but the answer is probably not. In extreme circumstances, there are emergency proceedings that can be done, but the situation I just described is not considered one of those emergency proceedings. Going before a judge and getting letters, which I describe to people as it's like your FBI badge of authority. You need the ability to go do something. Letters of some kind from a court are your badge of authority to go do that. Yeah. In order to get that, if you need it in a very, very short span of time, you've got to show that it's a real emergency. Like, we got 30 employees here and no one's there to pay payroll, and we need to get in and make sure blah, blah, blah. That's probably the prime example for emergency letters. In other situations, there is a span of time and there's a procedure with an original will. I'm going to say original because sometimes we have really good photocopies. It does fast track the whole process. It is faster, probably a handful of weeks, couple of months, and you're before a judge and you can go do what you need to do. But for a lot of families, there's this in limbo period that they discover, they don't realize. Someone passes away, you've got a will, the will says so-and-so is the executor. Okay, go do the thing. They don't realize that being appointed under a will is a nomination. And you have to be formally appointed by a court. So you get nominated under a will, you get appointed by a court, you get handed the authority to go sign the sales contract and sign the deed at closing. And a lot of it is vocabulary, and the vocabulary has multiple meanings for different words. It's not people's fault that they don't understand it. It is complex. But understanding that there's this period of being in limbo that's inherent for most probate proceedings, or people pass away and you got to figure out what's going on. That period of being in limbo is going to be there. So if people rush forward, hire an agent, list a house, sign a contract, and then they want to get to closing, but they haven't gotten in front of a judge first, you're going to be putting the brakes on. Then you have to figure things out. It is doable, but it usually takes a few conversations and some negotiations.
And that's one of the things that this point here is so important because, on the other hand, people that are going, at least in my experience, Drea, people who are in probate that are not yet appointed can benefit from talking, for example, to someone like myself, not because I'm going to try to get them under a contract, a listing agreement, but just they may have questions. They might be able to kind of start staging, at least mentally, starting to prepare a little bit about like, okay, what would be some things that we may need to do? I'm not talking about doing stuff to the house. We'll get into that later, but just there is some benefit, I think, that can happen through the dialogue. But the problem is that that's the difference between someone who is approaching real estate very transactionally of just trying to like do a deal versus trying to be more consultative in their approach towards potential clients, right? So it's not just looking at that as like just a commission to try to, cha-ching, get it done quickly, but to say, hey, look, here I have someone who is going through something very difficult and they're not ready yet. So I'm not going to put pressure on them to definitely not to sign something, even though that's a mistake a lot of people make, but to provide, understanding, maybe some guidance with regard to the real estate aspect, not the legal aspect, but the real estate aspect that will come later. But it's hard because that mindset is very hard in the real estate world, the way real estate agents think. But then also, as I'm sure you know, Drea, is that a lot of these executors and administrators or personal representatives before they even get appointed, they're getting bombarded by a lot of different people from day one.
True.
And sometimes it's hard to sift through what is real, what is going to be potentially helpful. Because, for example, someone like me, I would be very helpful to them. But then again, there's these other people, maybe they're a wholesaler and they're not even a real end buyer. They're posing as an end buyer. They just want to lock up the property under contract at a very, very low price so they can assign the contract to someone else and make money on the spread of what they put it under contract for and what they're actually going to sell the contract to the actual end buyer. A lot of the public does not know about all these little schemes, if you will, and they're legal. I mean, it can be done legally, but they're not aware of these things that can happen and they can be confused very easily. I'm kind of very passionate, Drea, about helping people understand what these things are. If you go to my website, you'll see a ton of information about wholesalers and some of these tactics that investors use to really, I don't want to say you could use scam. I got to be careful, but because they don't have any duty to the other person versus like I would have a duty, like through my license, I have a duty to be honest and fair with the public. And there's certain standards that I have to meet, legally. But if I'm just an investor, Joe Schmo, and I'm just out there trying to buy property, I don't have that duty. And it's a huge difference, right?
Right. Actually, giving clients a heads up that if someone in your family has passed away and they own real estate, you're probably going to get a lot of calls and texts from random numbers of people offering to buy X property. And it's a whole industry unto itself. Read an obituary, cross-reference it with property records, then run a search on family members. And all of a sudden you've got clients saying like, why am I getting 6 texts a day? It's not even in my name. We have to do all these things before we get there. So that's part of it. That can be disconcerting. But working with someone who acts more like a guide, going back to sales, a lot of perception, a lot of people go into sales in a more of a forced endeavor. I'm going to convince you that this is what you need. I think true sales is not something that needs to be forced. If you have a solution to someone's problem and you want to help them and it's a win-win, it sells itself.
Exactly.
I think it's more about providing solutions and providing guidance to people who are in a tough situation and they need to know what's ahead of me. What do I expect? What am I doing here? What's going on? Solution is what you can offer. Guidance and solution and explanation. Then it's not salesy. It's fixing a problem and helping someone through a tough spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I try to do is like, if they get one of these offers, I say, hey, you know what? We can schedule a call. No obligation. I'm not going to try to, convince you to do anything. I'll just go over the offer with you, and I'll tell you what I think as a real estate broker. What I think, what I think this looks like. Because a lot of times they don't have that feedback. So I'm right with you. Just trying to be a guide, trying to be helpful and provide information. And then by providing that information value, you hope that maybe if they need someone, they'll consider you. I want to shift gears a little bit, Drea. So I want to go into the world of probate a little bit. And I always like talking to the attorneys about problems and pitfalls, because the listener to our podcast is likely either just about, because this is a very niche, topic conversation. Okay. So like, I'm not expecting 1 million views on my podcast, but what I do know is that it's very niche down. And so the people who are listening to this are either searching for probate, they are about to enter the process, someone has died, they're now looking for answers, or they're in the process now and they've got issues that are going on and they're looking for answers, right? They're listening to their attorney, but they're also trying to be an informed consumer, right? So why don't you walk me through, at least for your practice, for what you see on the day-to-day, what are some things that you're saying that are problems and pitfalls, things that you would like just the general public to hear and maybe to hear what you think about them?
Problems and pitfalls. Now, I would say always, if there are multiple people involved and family members, whether or not they can get along and agree is going to tell you how smooth your path is. I can't always solve it, but we can help negotiate. That being said, some of the issues you run into are often with the court-monitored probates, I would say. I always tell people in Texas, we have over a dozen different types of probate, and that's because you can tailor it to the less complicated case. So it's not that it's all going to be a headache. It's just that some are far more detailed and they have court oversight. You want to see every single step of the way gets reviewed and approved by a judge. And then some of them are more fast-tracked, be like, yep, that's the will. Okay, you're in charge. Go do what you need to do. So it's a whole scale. In court-monitored probates, there are so many additional steps, again, because everything has to go in front of a judge and get approved. It protects a lot of people. It slows the process down. And that is a process that often comes up most often in situations where people do not agree, severely do not agree. So everything's slow, but it does keep moving forward if you've got guidance. I think one of the big situations that is, I don't say nearly unavoidable, but if a home is financed and someone passes away and you're talking about, usually it's someone who's not married, because most of the time married people have joint accounts, blah, blah, blah. If something happens to one of them, it's terrible, but someone is still standing in the adult role to get bills paid and access all that. When you have someone who passes away and there's a mortgage, and the bank accounts get frozen because nobody's appointed by the court yet, you have this kind of a difficult situation where, okay, the bills keep coming and who's going to pay them? That's one of the biggest questions. And with what money? If you can't get to the bank account because you don't have the letters yet, you're in this very stuck situation. So how to pay the mortgage is one of them. How to negotiate with a mortgage company who won't talk to you because it's not your name on the mortgage is another one. That's a big one. Because go ahead.
Can you go deep into that? Because actually, that is one of the most common things that I see and hear about. Can you go into depth about just kind of what you see with that? What can you do to help? What can they do to improve the situation? That's a really good one. Very real estate specific.
For sure. There are a few different ways it gets addressed. Sometimes people are able to look over some mail, find some old statements, and they at least know what amount is, and you'll have family members who can help pay that amount for the month or two it takes to get someone appointed. Sometimes there's no cash available to pay the mortgage, in which case the family is in a situation of, do we let this go into foreclosure? Do we try to fast track the court process? They're already going to be a few payments behind. Oftentimes being a few payments behind is repairable, but the situation where there's no money to pay the mortgage, but somebody wants to keep the house, that's tricky. Oftentimes you're looking at needing to sell it pay off the mortgage, pay that late fee for the month or two that it didn't get paid, and then just move forward. But again, you've got this in limbo period, again, where the bills keep coming and the money is locked up. So that there's not one size fits all solution for that. Oftentimes, the family member or friend who steps up to serve as executor or administrator is the person who very often pays out of their own money and then can get reimbursed later. But that is, they say no good deed goes unpunished. Okay, I'm going to step up, I'm going to help somebody, and it's going to cost me a bunch of money, which I'll get back later. But it just adds to their burden.
Drea, pardon me, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to share something with you that I experienced personally. I was in touch with a personal representative for quite some time. Usually, you can't fault people for being, guarded when it's a stranger. So, but sometimes they do open up. And I mean, luckily, I like to consider myself a good actor. I'm here trying to help people. And so this personal representative was sharing information with me, and we were just kind of waiting for her court proceedings to carry on and resolve. And then finally I got a phone call, Jeremy, okay, we're ready, let's meet. And as I'm doing kind of my intake, I have a little intake procedure before I meet with them just to make sure I have all the facts, make sure I can do my research properly when I go talk with them. And I'm doing my research and I'm like, there is no equity here. The house was purchased, 2.5 years ago. As you know, here in Austin, Texas, we're down about 27% or so, or even 30%, depending on who you're talking to, from the peak of May of 2022. Values have gone down substantially over the since 2022. So basically, there's no equity. And I was calculating the net sheet, right? And I was like, okay, well, what if my commission was this? What if there was no commission? What if I just, out of the goodness of my heart, pro bono, as the attorneys like to say, well, what if I was going to just to help, just if there was a little something that they could, get out of it? It wouldn't work. No matter how I calculated, it wouldn't work. Now, it turns out that personal representative was doing exactly what you have been talking about. But the problem is that the reason why I want to mention it is that this is something that people should be aware of, is that when I did all the numbers, and I talked to her and she's like, well, I just redid the windows and I did, she's thinking she's fixing it up to try to sell it. And she doesn't know. So she dumped in, I don't know how much money she dumped into it, but quite a lot. And when I told her the reality, and I told her, I go, I mean, I've been doing this for almost a decade. I know my numbers are correct, but I just said, hey, look, don't rely on me only. Talk to another agent. I could be totally wrong. I know I'm not wrong, but I just wanted her to have the peace of mind that I didn't want her to not go through with anything just off of what I told her. So I said, get a second opinion. Well, I know what the reality is. And so I think that there is a lot of value to understanding the value of the real estate for the personal representative before they start investing money into that project. And it's interesting because my experience with attorneys, and of course, I know this is not you, Drea, because you're one of the top attorneys in the Austin area. So I know this is not you, but I have seen very interesting things with attorneys and real estate. And I know there's a wide variety of people and experiences and knowledge, but because I have seen attorneys in divorce proceedings, when they're trying to come up with a settlement, they have to come up with the value of the house. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. And the attorneys in this case settled on a Zillow valuation, which was completely off. And it caused tremendous problem. It's hard to believe, but it's true. And the house wasn't worth what the automated valuation was, which caused a huge problem for the person who kept the house. So there's a lot of, attorneys have different ideas on how to obtain that value, or even like using the appraisal district value, which is also problematic, very problematic, especially these days. So what I'm kind of getting at is that just my opinion is that if a personal representative is, thinking about carrying the mortgage, carrying the holding costs of the property, to really start get an idea up front of what you think that value is. And it doesn't mean they have to get a full appraisal, because that is expensive. That does cost money, but it could also be a broker price opinion, which is not just a CMA. It's a more in-depth analysis of value from a broker's perspective. So it's not the same as an appraisal, but it carries a little bit more weight than just a CMA. Because a lot of real estate agents, Drea, when they go meet a potential seller, the kind of CMA or comparative market analysis that they bring is usually like, oh, here's a few houses that are sold in your area. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a much more in-depth report. And while it's not an appraisal, banks do use BPOs when foreclosure comes. If they don't want to buy an appraisal, they will use it as a data point. So anyway, not to go too deep into that, but the point I just wanted to make was when I had to tell that to that personal representative, my heart dropped because I was like, oh my God, this person just totally lost all of that money.
Right. Because there's an assumption that's usually right that there's equity in a piece of real estate. Oftentimes it can be over leveraged. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Especially in a market that just took a bit of a dip. So yeah, that can be problematic. I guess the questions that I would have for that person would be, what else is in the estate? If you're speaking in an estate scenario, real estate is one component, it's one asset. But if that individual spent a bunch of money maintaining an asset and then wasn't able to get repaid from that, maybe there's some bank accounts, maybe there's some cars, maybe there's some other assets that could be liquidated. So she at least isn't out all the money she spent out of the goodness of her heart trying to help fix this house up for sale. Leading back to a good point, even just some consultations, seeking advice for that particular market from someone who knows it can be worth its weight in gold because she could have probably prevented that. But, she was operating on an assumption that is usually correct.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Drea, tell me a little bit about getting reimbursed as a personal representative. What's involved with that? What do they need to show? What kind of accounting should the person have? Tell me a little bit about that.
Now, the biggest difference is going to be if it is an independent probate administration or a dependent probate administration. And this assumes that there's a court proceeding going on. Sometimes people sell homes without the need for a court proceeding. In which case, so it is possible. It's like sort of a probate side road in Texas. And I'm sure you're familiar with it. But with that, the biggest component is, does everyone agree that this person spent the money and should get it back? Okay. If you're talking about an independent administration, which I like to compare to, let's say probate is a road trip and the court is your parent. Like, here's the keys to the car, the tank's full of gas. Let us know when you get there. But if we don't hear from you, we'll assume everything's fine. Here, go do what you need to do. A dependent administration is the same road trip, but you're on side roads with a bunch of stop signs, and every stop sign is also a traffic checkpoint. You got to check in. The court has to say, yep, you can move forward. So in those three scenarios, if it's non-probate, people need to agree. If it's independent, then it's really up to the judgment of the administrator or the executor, the person in charge. So they can use their best judgment, of course, to reimburse themselves. Granted, it's against the law if they reimburse themselves for anything more than that. Their job is to put the interests of the heirs of the estate before their own. If someone asks for a reimbursement from an independent administrator or executor, then they just need to show them enough documentation to convince them that this is a correct reimbursement. So it's kind of good faith and agreement. If you're talking about a dependent administration, which is the very complicated, very long court-monitored proceeding, you have to be able to show money out and where it went. So it usually means, okay, you paid the mortgage for 6 months. We need to see statements saying this is the exact amount that was due in those months. And then we need to see where the money came out of your personal accounts. So a bank statement where almost everything's redacted, showing this money came out of your account and it went here for this bill. This money came out, it was on this credit card, it went for this bill. So we have to show 2 points, one where the money is requested and one where the money went out. And sometimes you have to have a hearing in front of a judge. If you document it properly, you often don't have to get in front of a judge, but you really have to show exactly where each penny went if it's a court-monitored probate administration.
Have you ever come across problems where someone was taking care of the mortgage or paying the bills, just holding, basically carrying the holding costs of the estate to kind of keep it going, where things started out really well and nice and happy, and then things started degrading and deteriorating and then causing conflict, and then it's now hard to recoup money or things like that?
It is. If there's equity in the estate, it's usually not hard for someone to recoup money that they spent. So if you can show that you spent this money in good faith, then you'll be able to get it back. If there's disagreement, you can go in front of the judge and show them this is what happened. But some people like to pay for things in cash, and that can be tricky. Like, we can't prove that, the truck was stuck and it was by the side of the road and you paid a locksmith $800 cash to move the truck, even though the truck was an asset of the estate and that needed to be done. If you don't have documentation, we don't have a way to show anybody, whether it's the executor or the judge, that happened. So documenting what you spend is important there. But if there is equity in the estate, like liquidity, whether it comes from tool collection of cars, just things with value, then people are more or less assured of being able to get their money back. Because in the tiers of debts, there's several tiers of creditor claims, we call them. The top two are funeral costs and, final medical expenses, and then costs of administration of the estate. What does it take to keep things going, to make sure things are taken care of? That's your legal fees. That's your locksmith bill because the truck was in a dangerous space and nobody had the keys to it. So those are the top tier that will be paid back if there's cash available.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Drea, talking about debts, I want to go over a very common scenario that I see as a real estate broker helping executors and administrators in probate, and that is when the mortgage becomes delinquent. Now, I know this, but I want you as the attorney expert who has the ability to talk about it from a legal perspective. I would like you to share with us, I'm going to give you the scenario. This is like the most common scenario I see. And when I say it's common, I will see this multiple times a year. Okay. The decedent passed away a few months ago. There's some money in the bank account, it's an auto pay. A lot of people pay with auto pay their mortgage. Right? Okay, so it's going. Okay, balance is diminishing. Now we hit negative. Okay, now we're overdrawing. Okay, we got a problem. The mortgage. Okay, we got 30 days. We got 60 days. Okay, the foreclosure process is now starting. Right, the acceleration clause has been initiated. It's all it's all coming due now. What kind of protections exist for the estate when this happens, and what should people do when they see this coming, when it's imminent?
So it does happen. I have seen that happen. Especially in a situation where the bank isn't notified, because if you notify a bank that an account owner passed away, they will freeze that account. Now, in the scenario you just described, it's beneficial for that to be not frozen yet so we can keep paying the mortgage. When that happens and it starts, I guess the first question I would ask is there a probate proceeding going on? So in Texas, once you file we call an application to open up a probate case, to get someone appointed and do what needs to be done, you have a 6-month stay. It will delay any foreclosure proceedings for 6 months. Now, that doesn't stop some late fees from accruing, but it does mean that everything is put on pause for a 6-month period. And the goal is that is usually enough time to get someone put in charge, figure out what else is there, get someone in a position where they can fix the problem and keep things moving. Usually that's enough time. Sometimes it's not. And in that case, I have had cases where you surpass the 6 months and the bank is still not being paid and they are implementing foreclosure proceedings. And it gets really scary. In that scenario, communication is key. I have to say, in my experience, banks don't want to foreclose. It's a lot of work for them. They have to hire attorneys. They have to do all this. They have to sell. They don't want to sell the house. They just want to get paid. So
I always like to say, Drea, the banks are not in the real estate business. They're in the money business, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So they don't want it to happen really any more than you do. They just know that they have assurance they'll get their value back, but it's a lot of hoops they need to jump through to even do that. So communication is key, especially even showing a bank that the house is listed. You're making good faith efforts to sell it. And this circles back to, if there's a probate proceeding, is it independent or is it dependent? And in a dependent proceeding, while they can take longer, it is more difficult for everything to happen, basically. So I've seen situations where we had to talk to the bank for over months and months and months. And while they could have implemented proceedings at any given time, they didn't, because they knew that good faith efforts were being made to sell this property, which would have instantly paid off the mortgage. So everyone wants the property to sell in that scenario. Everyone's rooting for it. And you just have to keep chugging along. It is scary. It is mentally and emotionally scary for people, especially, if they're handling the mess, then they were probably close to the person or they're close to the family. So this is impactful on an emotional and personal level. And then they get to deal with bills need to be paid, and it apparently needs to be my money, or this house is going to be foreclosed on, and this house, belonged to a friend of mine and their kids. And there's so many different aspects going in. It's pretty scary. In my experience, though, I can say at the very least, the banks don't really want to foreclose any more than you want them to.
Yeah. On this point, relatedly, it's interesting that a lot of personal representatives, executors, administrators, they delay to sell based on things that don't make sense. Like, for example, there's all these things in the house. Usually, now there are exceptions. I had one situation where I had a client who it was the decedent was the mother, and there was these things. I don't know. They were not Beanie Babies, but it was something like that, right?
A collection.
And some sort of collection, and I thought they had no value. In fact, when I saw it, I thought, oh, that's cute, But apparently these things were very valuable. I mean, thousands of dollars, right?
Wow.
Like, they had value. And don't even ask me what it was. I can't even remember. And so sometimes there are things that make sense and they're valuable and you should sell them because the estate will benefit from the sale of those items. But I'll be honest with you, Drea. In my experience, in the vast majority of cases, estate sales really do not yield any significant value. And the time that it takes to arrange all of that and schedule that and all of this, while that's going on, the house is sitting there vacant. Mm-hmm. The longer that it's vacant, there's a lot of risks to a vacant house. One is that there's the insurance issue, but also when a house is vacant and not lived in, things start deteriorating, things start breaking down, and problems can occur when no one's there. There could be a leaky pipe that turns into something much bigger, and then you get there and you realize that. Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I tell executors and administrators is that, look, if there's no real value here, in terms of these personal items, it is not worth delaying the sale. Now, especially in a place like Austin, where now it's not declining as much as it was, but we still are in a downward trending market. And so there's really more to lose by waiting than not. And so I try to encourage people. Now, obviously, people are on their own timeline. It's not about pressuring people to do things, but just trying to bring awareness of timing. Like, is it worth, delaying a sale for a couple $1,000s when we have a lot of economic uncertainty and a declining market? I would argue, no, it probably is not worth it. And especially if they're in this kind of pre-foreclosure situation, right? There should be a little bit more urgency, and it's not, we don't want to be blind for, some pennies that we're going to, let the ship sink and go down like the Titanic. Although that's rare, that wouldn't really happen. But you get what I'm saying, right? You get what I'm saying.
Yeah. So you've seen situations where people have real estate as part of an estate, and they don't prioritize like kind of getting the plan in place. What's going to happen with the house? Yeah,
well, so it's what happens is that, and I will blame my industry, Drea, because real estate has a lot of the real estate industry has a lot of problems. Okay, one of the problems that the real estate industry has is that there's a lot of ego with real estate agents. Okay, this business is filled with very, very big egos, and so a lot of, and I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is actually a really good example. Actually, I don't think I've talked about it on my podcast, so I'm going to talk about it now. We need new material, Drea. There you
go. There's your content.
There you go. So it is very common for real estate in probate to have significant deferred maintenance. And it's just the nature of what's happened, right? A lot of times, now sometimes there are young people that had an early demise, and that's very unfortunate. But a lot of people, they've lived a full life. They're towards the end of their life. They're dealing with health problems, other, mental health problems, physical problems, dementia, things like this. And so the house upkeep is not on the top of their list, right? Like at the end of their life, they're just trying to just kind of, live their last moments. And, the last thing they care about is the property. So it's not uncommon that, these houses are in disarray. They have a lot of deferred maintenance. Sometimes it's just cosmetic. Sometimes it's structural because you got a roof, you've got infestations of different things. I've seen everything. I mean, I've gone into houses, Drea, and I'll share this with you at some point outside of the podcast, where I've had to wear a hazmat suit to go in because it was such a disaster. I have seen almost, I won't say everything. I always say, whenever I say I've seen everything, I always see something else. So I've seen almost everything.
Will prove you wrong. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it keeps proving me wrong every day. And so my point is, the average real estate agent, when they go and see a house like that, they don't know what to do. It's just because for a lot of real estate agents, they're going to, it's Tiny Tim, Sally Sue. They've got 2.5 children. They go to the school down the street. Timmy got a promotion from Amazon, so now they got to move, or like that's, and so it's like a normal house. It's a normal situation,
Right.
quote unquote normal
like
situation.
Picture perfect listing is what they're going
for.
Yeah.
And you see it all the time with real estate agents and their marketing. It's like, oh, here I am. I look beautiful. The house is beautiful. Mm-hmm. And that's very different with, I mean, not always, but it's very frequently is a very different scenario with probate. Like I said, mm-hmm. These houses typically, they have issues. Sometimes also, like, I'm dealing with a couple of hoarder houses now. So there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different situations going on, and they go in and they're just like, oh, you got to do this. You got to do. They're putting all these conditions to the sale instead of coming up with an as-is sale solution, which can be profitable. Mm-hmm. So because there's all kinds of real estate strategies that a very experienced real estate broker would know about to be able to handle those situations without incurring additional expenses and risk. And gotcha. And so it's kind of interesting to me because when. Because everyone kind of knows a real estate agent, so they go, "Oh, okay, I know Sarah. Sarah got her license yesterday. The ink is still dripping from the certificate from the Texas Real Estate Commission. So yeah, we'll get her to do it." And they just don't know how to approach these properties and approach these situations. So. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where it's really, especially in a case where there's some distress involved, which is not always the case, but when there is some distress involved, you got to have the strategy. You got to have the right strategy to approach the sale. And often it is about the house, but it's about the people and the situation. What do these people and what does this situation need with this sale? Not just the house, and it's all about the house, so it's a very different mindset in approaching these.
I agree. It's not just like with probate and legal cases. It's not always formulaic. Mm-hmm. Can't just be like, okay, whatever we start, this is where we're going to finish. You really have to take a custom approach with these people and this family and this situation and this house and the condition it's in. And as a lawyer, a lot of my focus is advising clients who might be serving as executor or about to be serving, what their job is. They're already doing, the people I talk to, there's always a go-to person in the family, and I often wind up talking to the go-to person. And that person has a very full plate already. They have their own full-time job. They have their own family. They're probably stepping in because it's their friend and they're the trusted person, but now they've got to take care of this and make sure that it goes for the best value so that the inheritance can go to their kids, which this person then has to go set up a trust so it can live, there's so many things on their plate. And I agree, a formulaic approach that's like, okay, this house is like this and it needs to look like this, sunshine and rainbows before we can even put a for sale sign on it. And you have to do X, Y, Z all the way through. That's not always the best approach. And I think I really like listing out all the options. Sometimes there's several of them. Usually in that case, it's probably 3. And just talking through them is really helpful for people to get a bearing as to what to expect down each path. And that's probably estate planning-esque of me. It's like, let's start at the beginning and see what happens down here, what happens here, and what happens there. With a house that's not in pristine condition, maybe someone had a lengthy last illness and maintenance, it drops down on the list of priorities. So there's good, better, best. There's what would it take to get this shiny and sparkling and all the curbside appeal? What would it take if we do as is and look at the market and who would be your buyers and how would that work, which is very probate specific. How do we make the most of this situation without killing you in the process? And and putting more and more work on your plate, but still getting a very good value for the estate while you're doing 75 other tasks. I always tell people doing nothing is always an option. It's not always the best option, but if you do nothing, here's this path. And if people just back away and do nothing, if there's a mortgage on the house, the bank will eventually foreclose and they will sell it at a foreclosure sale. So the bank gets paid. And if there's any extra, that goes to the estate. And if there's no estate open, they'll pay it over to the unclaimed property for the state of Texas and someone can go get it later. So doing nothing does have an end result. It's just that no one is going to have the heirs or the family's best interest in mind. They're not going to be trying to preserve the value that's in the house. The bank is just trying to get themselves paid. So oftentimes you wind up with the middle ground or the unreachable, not almost unreachable, sparkle, sunshine and rainbows. Like, how do we make this the most beautiful, pristine listing ever? But I think a middle ground approach is often the best way to go, especially in a more drastic situation like a hoarding situation or where there's a lot of maintenance that hasn't been done on the house. So I think you're right. Someone who has some experience and knows not to just go for the prettiest option is a good fit.
One of the things that's kind of interesting, that's kind of a newer trend, I don't think it's a good thing for the consumer. It sounds good on the surface, but it's when you really look at it, I don't, in my personal opinion, as a real estate broker, I don't think it's a good idea. And I would never do this in my company. So one of the things that but some companies are doing is they're basically essentially offering a kind of like loan to the homeowner or seller. In this case, it would be maybe the estate, to do renovations to the property. Okay. And the reason why I don't think this is a good idea is that, first of all, we know factually that there's almost no improvement or thing that you're going to do that is going to have a 100% return on investment. Now, a lot of things together can have an effect. I changed I put in a new bathroom. Well, a new bathroom is not a 100% or plus return. You're never going to get a full return on let's say a bathroom, for example, which is a major piece of a property. And the thing is also, you cannot project, you cannot objectively say, okay, if I do X thing, objectively, I know it's going to increase my net proceeds by X amount. In a sense, what people are doing is they're doing mental math, and they're imagining that it's going to be this. If I do this, it's going to be this. But I can tell you, as a real estate expert and someone who has invested in real estate, that is hogwash. That is nonsense. That is rubbish. Even I have friends in different parts of the country that actually flip house. I don't flip houses myself, but I have friends in the real estate industry in different parts of the country that do flips, and they'll do 20 flips a year, and they know a certain percentage of those flips will not be profitable. It's already underwritten in their business plan. So when an individual homeowner or maybe an executor, when they're thinking they're going to kind of flip the house, I know professionals in this business that they know they're going to fail. These are people who actually know what they're doing. They have a set plan. They have a crew. They can do everything at below cost. They know that a certain number of these are going to be unprofitable. So what are the chances that you, as a consumer that maybe sold only one house in their lifetime or a couple houses in their lifetime, spaced 7 years apart, is going to know exactly how to do this in a profitable way and actually not lose money? So this kind of thing, it's very appealing. It appeals to the part of us that says, I want to present it well. I think this is going to make more money. But when you really look at it from a business standpoint, very devoid of emotion, just really from a real estate business perspective, it's a risky thing to do that. And also, what if you have a falling out with that company? Now you have this debt attached with this relationship that didn't have to be there. It's kind of interesting. These are things that are emerging in the real estate industry. And I really caution, this is my program, so I can say it. I caution, if you're listening to this and someone's approaching you with that idea, think about it, because that there is some risk involved in that. Drea, I want to ask you a question. We've been talking for almost an hour now. Time's really gone by very quickly. I want to ask you, you're a super experienced attorney. You're someone that I would want to hire. You're someone that I would trust implicitly with. If I was a personal representative, I would trust you implicitly. I know firsthand, behind the scenes, you're amazing. But let me ask you a question. Someone's watching this, they're confused, they're disoriented. We had a clinical psychologist on this program that talked about how she's actually, if you go into our archive on YouTube, you'll find her name's Krista Jordan. She's a PhD, board certified clinical psychologist. We had her on here, and she was talking about loss, and she shared a story with us about how when she lost her mom, she is just and she's a psychologist. I mean, she's human, but she, maybe has some extra ability to cope, we would think maybe. And she was like, she's like, Jeremy, when my mom died, I was so out of it. I lost my keys. And I was looking for them like crazy, and I didn't realize I put them in the freezer. I didn't even realize I was putting things away, and I just totally forgot about it. So she was just talking about how we're just not processing clearly when we're in this situation. There's a lot of stress. What's your advice? Someone has passed away. Let's say the family is kind of has a lot of characters in it. They know it's going to fall to them to sort of kind of rally the troops and get things going. What's your advice to them? What should they do? What should they be thinking? How should they go about they're going to have to get an attorney. What should they look for in an attorney? What questions do they need to ask? What do they need to look for? Give us your insight.
I have often spoken with people, usually sometimes very, very close in time to the passing of their loved one. And I'm often the first person to say, take some time, be with your family, and reach back out to me in a month or two. And let's talk again. In that time, though, the things I tell them to keep an eye out for are usually the kind of things that come up later on that might require probate. I say when someone passes away, a court probate proceeding is not always required. But things to keep an eye out for are what kind of bills are out there, what kind of, I would say, assets, property, your stuff. What kind of stuff did this person have? And how is it set up? Again, it's kind of estate planning-esque, but is it set up to immediately go to someone else, maybe like a beneficiary on a life insurance policy? Or is it just in their name, in which case it would sort of remain in their estate and then maybe need to be probated later on? So to start making a mental catalog of what's out there and where could issues arise. So I usually just talk them through it, kind of let them know what the process is. The process is required when XYZ, and it's not required when ABC, and kind of just give them a checklist of things to look out for. The checklist is often assets, like is there real estate that's only in their name and there's no other way to transfer it? Did they have a will? What does the will say? Does the will have language that matches classic next of kin inheritance, or does it differ? I always tell people, if you don't have a will, Texas has default settings where your possessions go to your heirs, your next of kin. And when you make a will, you have the ability to kind of override those default settings. So one of the big important questions is, do we have something that differs from the classic inheritance situation? Because then you know whose interests are being affected potentially. So the number one question is usually, what things do they own that are in their, quote, estate? What's still in their name, what's stuck. And oftentimes they don't know that early on. So again, just giving them a rundown of things to keep in mind, bills to look out for, like the mortgage statement, and just telling them to take some time, because oftentimes it's too soon to tell. Now, every now and then you'll have someone who copes with grief and copes with big emotions by doing things. So sometimes you have a client who's like, no, I need a list. I need a checklist. I want to do things because that makes me feel better. I feel like I'm accomplishing something. In which case I'm like, okay, here's a bigger checklist. But the essentials are figure out what's out there, figure out what bills are out there, and figure out, is there a will? What does it say? So, yeah.
Drea, what about attorneys? There's so many attorneys out there. One of the things I talked about with another attorney on the show was like, we see different kinds of attorneys out there, right? You're driving your car and you see like a one-man shop, and they do immigration law, they do injury, they do tax, they do they're doing everything, it seems like, right? Now I do understand there are firms that will have an attorney for like each kind of department or division, right? The bigger firms, right? But it's confusing. I think it's interesting. Hiring an attorney is interesting because it's like, there's an element of like, you want to feel confident that they know what they're doing, right? Because the stakes can be very high. Personal dimension, because you're going to have a working, just like I think of my own clients, right? Like when we sign a listing agreement, we're kind of, we're in it together. We're partnering in a sense for a period of time, 30, 40, 60 days. Yeah, we're a team. We're part of the team. Exactly. So I want to feel some rapport and some connection and some sense that this other person cares about me, cares about my issue, cares about my case. There's all these different fee structures that exist in law. There's flat fee, there's hourly, there's people that just do probate and trust, there's people that do a couple different practice areas.
Sure. All different flavors.
So this is, and I think actually a lot of attorneys do not fully understand. I know this is not you because you're amazing, but a lot of attorneys do not appreciate and understand that there's a lot of difficulty in trying to find an attorney that they're comfortable with and how to evaluate this. So as an attorney, what's your advice to people as they're looking to hire someone?
I would say talk to a few different attorneys. It's a lot like finding a doctor or a healthcare provider that you mesh with. You need to be able to speak to them. You have to connect, and you are a team trying to achieve a goal. So it's like anyone. I would say talk to a few different ones. I still do free 15 to 30 minute consultations. And I think it's worthwhile. And I tell people, if you're not sure, go talk to some other attorneys. Because you're right. I would say probate is not for the faint of heart. And because there are so many different types of probate in Texas, a lot of attorneys can say they can practice probate officially and really only handle the smaller ones, uncontested. It's a simple will. We're just going to probate the will. You'll be appointed executor. You're good to go. We'll put together an inventory, and it's not terribly complicated. When you get into situations without a will, with children under the age of 18, with disabled heirs, with people who want to fight and get their own lawyers, and then they fight some more, then those are going to get into the more complicated, nuanced types of probate. Then it's a little harder to find the attorney you jive with because you're in a narrower group of attorneys who handle those cases. But you should still talk to people and figure out one that you like and you feel comfortable with. I think if you can't talk to your attorney, then it's not off to a great start. Even if they do everything right, you might as well like the person you're talking to.
Okay, so let's say someone's watching this and they go, "Man, I love Drea. Drea's going to be my attorney. I feel it. I'm vibing with Drea." They're going to contact you. You're going to give them a 15, 30-minute consultation just to make sure that you can help them and it makes sense. Is there something they should bring to you? Is there any, to make that productive for both of you? What can the person do?
In a probate situation, some of the essential facts, and usually someone on our team will get some essential facts when they first talk to them on the phone and get this scheduled. The essential facts are, how long has it been since they passed away? Did they have a will? What county is it in? What are the main issues right now? Is it because there's real estate and the mortgage payments are not getting paid and you got to do something? So that's a big part of it. But yeah, who passed away? What's the family situation like? What are the big problems that you're facing right now is usually the crux of it. Because every consultation, my goal is to figure out what is the problem you're facing and can I offer a solution? And if I can't offer a solution, I can usually at least offer a referral, like go talk to this person. I think they can help you. I know just enough to be able to point them in the right direction. And ideally, if they have an issue, I can either help solve it for them or just give them some simple advice. I joke that I'm often trying to put myself out of business. It's like, so you could do this, this, and this, and this is a cheaper option, and this is a more expensive option, but it's more comprehensive. So again, I like listing the options.
Very good. Very good. I love it. Drea, I want to thank you so much for giving your time. It's the most important thing that we have. We can't get more of it. Our time is so precious. And I want to really thank you for spending time with us, not just with me, but with all of my listeners, all of my viewers who are going to see this shortly after it's published and maybe even years after when it's out there and people are watching this because they're trying to get answers. So I want to thank you. Now, I know that someone's going to watch this. They're going to be in the Central Texas area and they might want to hire you and they might want to connect with you. How can people get in touch with you?
The best way is probably just give us a call. The number is 512-543-1622. You can also Google us, of Legacy Estates and Trust, and just, get in touch with our front desk and figure out if there's something that you need and maybe we can help solve a problem.
That's awesome. We will have all of your information in our show notes below. With YouTube, it'll be in the description, but we'll also try to put it in the description for the different podcast channels that we put it in so that people can get a hold of you. Again, Drea, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
And I want to really thank our audience for watching. Again, my name is Jeremy Kritt, owner and broker of Kritt Real Estate and the founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. If you are a personal representative or executor, or you're a personal representative that is not yet appointed, but is just kind of starting to look at your options, get in touch with me. All of my information is in the description of this video, or if you're watching us or if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, our information will be in the description. Also, just type in Kritt Real Estate, Jeremy Kritt. I will come up. I'm easily found. And get in touch. Give me a call. I'll be happy to talk to you. Look forward to seeing you on our next episode, and take care. God bless.